Okay, we will call the Master Plan Implementation Committee meeting of June 6, 2023 to order. I am Cheryl Tagayas, the chair, and why don't we go around this way and then we'll get to the screen.
I'm Josh Eckhart-Lee, the Assistant Town Planner.
I'm Roxanne Musto, Select Board member.
We're on the zero appointed member.
Get correct appointed member.
Regina Campbell,
Favor?
Favor Kaylee, appointed member.
Okay, great. Approval of meeting minutes. Did everyone get a chance to review the minutes? Does anybody have any corrections, additions, changes? No? Then I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
Motion to approve minutes.
Is there a second?
I'll a second.
All those in favor, because we have Tabor, we're gonna have to go roll call. Tabor,
Yes.
Roxanne,
Yes.
Warren,
Yes.
Dick,
Half years, I missed one meeting, I forget which one it was. So, God, which one did I miss?
This
The 15th.
All right.
You sure?
I'll approve the primary,
I have a present on the 15th.
you have me present on the 15th, all right, then I'll approve that.
Regina,
Yes.
and Chair, yes. We, I think are going to come back to citizen speak and staff update so that we can go first to number 5 and then to number 6, since we have folks joining us, guests joining us for those two agenda items. So without any further ado, let's welcome Pat and Fritz. Please come up to the table. So happy that you could join us, and
Thank you for inviting us.
did you have a chance to read through the 3-volume master plan that we sent you links to?
Yeah, I have a few typos with it.
So I would say, oh, I read executive.
That's good, yes, that's where it's nicely summarized, yes. Well, as I said to you when we spoke on the phone, the committee's been at it for some time and getting to a point where we need to make a recommendation whether the plan should be updated. And so we decided that certain parts of the plan, it would be beneficial to invite folks like yourself and people who've been working on things in the last 8 years that even maybe weren't contemplated when the plan was done 10 years ago, when some of us were working on the plan. And so Sustainable Milton was one that came in January, gave us some great feedback. And we thought that this topic, in particular, Regina had suggested that this topic be something that there's particular items in the plan itself, but perhaps those could be expanded upon, reinforced, added to, and we found made measurable. We found the same thing with the sustainability goals, making those measurable, and things have changed since in time since that too. So I know you gave a presentation to town meeting. Not everyone on our committee is town meeting members. So if you don't mind just giving very whatever level of overview of what you provided there, and then we can just have a dialogue about it. Okay.
Well, that's perfect, because that's exactly the person I thought.
Okay.
So we figured that a number of you were not at town meeting, and that it would be helpful to just talk a little bit about our work. And also the second piece is exactly how we thought we would like to engage with you, is to talk about the plan. We both had a chance to look at it, not in detail, all 3 volumes, but we did do a quick dive on it. And Cheryl also sent us some information regarding I think 3 goals that you had, that she pulled out that directly relate to DEI. And Chris and I have some thoughts about that, but we would like for it to be a dialogue with you. What I can tell you is that our committee was established in 2020 in October. What our goal was to work with the select board to review the town policies and procedures and budgets for the purposes of advancing equity and justice for all Milton residents. And I think that, especially back in 2020, the context was that, there's a lot of conversations nationally at the state level and also here in Milton. And so it was deemed that it was a good thing to do. And so we we pulled together a committee and, that our charge was just review everything, come back with some recommendations. And we had to come back in 18 months. And we did some periodic check-ins. Chris and I were the co-chair, but there were 11 of us in total. They were cross-section of the community, some of the people you may know. We had Frank Davis, who served on a number of committees. Karen Rose Horn, who does Courageous Conversations, Keith McDermott. I'm not going to catch everybody, but Quincy Miller, Eastern Bank, and then Renisha Silva, who is police officer in Boston, and brought some insights. And then, of course, we had Reverend Lisa Ward and a couple of other number of other people. And I will send you the presentation. Okay.
And Reverend Ward was there because there's one slot that's for somebody who's part of one of the applications. So that's going to be.
Yeah, all of them were volunteer positions, but there were 2-3 slots that were dedicated to specific organization. One of them was Citizens for Diverse Milton, of which I represented. Courageous Conversation, which Karen had first did, and then the Interfaith Collegiate Association. And that's, we'll talk a little bit about that before again.
I think it's, well, we can,
talk a little bit about.
well, let me, I just want to see what's, I mean, we can, yeah, I mean, I think this part.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So from October through April of 2022, we did a bunch of things. But one of the things that we did was that we tried to understand how would you define DEI for Milton? And how would you, like, what were the issues and what could we actually achieve as a committee in terms of making a recommendation? Because, you know, it's a whole wide world. I mean, diversity is everything, right? We were focused around ethnic diversity, immigration status, and primarily. But we were very aware that was a very narrow, I wouldn't say narrow, but it's not the whole encompassing what most people would mean when they say diversity. And so we tried to figure out, like, well, how could we do something that would touch as many people as possible in the town? And Chris, jump in anytime you want. And then so we created some subcommittees. We got 4 of them. And the 4 subcommittees were affordable housing, town government, school, youth and families, and then police and fire. And we got to those just by brainstorming of saying, like, where do we think as a committee, we could make the most specific recommendations that would actually, you know, have some possibility of impacting people.
And we did that, I mean, knowing that we had an 18-month charge, right? And that there's only so much we're going to accomplish. And we'll probably bring this up later in the report, says it as much. And I think that the new charge that the select board has provided is along with the idea that there are other things that we could explore. But the example that comes to mind for me is health equity.
Yes.
And it's just something that's very, very important, but that we as a committee can discuss and future committees really should. Okay.
And we know that there are other groups in town that are looking at health equity also. And so we did try to work with various other organizations and groups, you know, and it is not to say that, you know, we knew that we weren't going to come up with a definitive answer. There is no definitive answer on these kinds of issues. Our view as a committee was that we would help to move forward, that we would become a more inclusive town, that we would become one that is welcoming to more people, to make them feel like they can participate as to their best extent. So we did some research. As all good committees, I guess, do.
We formed subcommittees.
Yes.
That's all good committees.
We formed those 4 subcommittees, and then we started doing some research, and we'll talk a little bit about some of this, but we reviewed all public, not all, but a lot of publicly available documents like the policies and procedures, the contract process and contracts for the town, and statistical data. We also interviewed a number of stakeholders and experts. And so for affordable housing, we talked to an expert from BU, who was actually a professor whose work in her students' work is in this looking at affordable housing across Massachusetts and how does that work. We talked to a number of pretty much all of the key stakeholders in the town, so all the department heads. We did interviews with underneath them where it was appropriate to make sure that, we were capturing the full depth of what was going on. We also did a townwide survey in the fall of 2021. And when we did the survey, one of the things that we were just, 11 people. And so you can't know everything. And so we based upon, and we didn't have the expertise. I mean, one of the things that Chris mentioned about health equity, there was nobody who knew anything about health. So basically we used our own skills to sort of push what we could. And also there's only so much you can do in 18 months. And we provided an interim report to the select board in April of 2021. And basically, we just talked about our preliminary findings of the research and the discussions that we had had. And then finally, in April of 2022, there were other reports, but we did our final report to the select board. And so,
Just really quickly,
yeah.
because we're gonna get into the findings. Any questions about the process?
How is the survey done?
We did the survey using, we worked with the town and the town administrator at the time. And we did it using Google Doc, I think it was. And we got almost 600 responses back from town members. We used the network. We tried to send out emails if the town had them, like an email blast. We contacted a lot of the not-for-profits and neighborhood organization and asked them to circulate it, the survey. And so I think those are the primary ways. We also did we went to the newspapers and just kind of, we had no money, so we didn't do that, but we did do letters to let people know that this is what we were doing.
In fact, a QR code.
Yeah, had a QR.
We left it open for. Yeah, we use as much as possible.
I participated in the survey, and I just, but was there a focal, a forum after that, a focus group? Or
Yes,
group?
yes, that's what I said.
So I also, I know I was part of something,
Right.
there was a subsequent to that,
Right.
they had a show, did you get interest in participating, which I did, and I remember having some sort of a chat with a number of people, and it went fine. Some of those go, and some don't go so well, but it was fine.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me of that too, because that was the second thing we wanted to, because, as you read about some of the things, we tried to pull out themes from the survey, but we also wanted to check in with people and also give people an opportunity to talk a little bit more in depth about what they mean. Because, when you're doing a quick survey, a lot of times you're answering what we thought was a good thing, the question. We had an expert who had done a number of surveys as part of our group.
That's good.
But we were hoping that we were also not so confident that we could ask the ultimate right question, so we did do some. Any follow-up to that, anybody else? And then we combine both of those. So.
Yeah,
You want me to take it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, we actually try to think about, like, what do you know, everybody uses these phrases, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we had a lot of conversations about that. And as you probably would not be surprised, everybody has a little bit of a different view about what that is. But one of the things that we try to simplify things a little bit, so we can talk a little bit about how we identify it, because there's a lot of ways that we can be different in thought. We can all have the same background, ethnic background, we have a very different thought pattern, but we religiously very different, right? So there's a bunch of things, but we said that we looked at diversity as identifying characteristics that might differentiate one individual from another. That's very broad, right? And then we talked about equity, and we said, what is equity? And because it could have been equality, and as you probably know, a lot of the legal pieces from the government talks about equality. And we said, and everyone is using equity to me, it's fairness and justice, because, you know, it's not always, we can't each of us benefit in the same way from the same thing. And so one, I love Kara Valerie Jones, who's at the school department, have a slide that I thought talked to that very well. And that is, she had people looking at a baseball game outside of a fence. And so some of them were kids, some of them were tall, some were short. And so everybody has an equal opportunity to see that game. But if you're a little kid and the fence is 4 feet high, you're not gonna be able to see it. So the equity piece of it is, how do we level the playing field? And in her thing, she had a couple of ways that just is very simplistic. You know, one was some kids were standing on a box, you know, like little boxes, and others were standing on, sitting on the shoulders of adults. And I like that particularly because it talks about our interconnection to each other and our need to ensure that each of us are able to participate at the level that we can.
So sort of meeting people are there.
Yeah. And then we talked about inclusion, and you know, what does that mean? And I think that you all have a little bit of this in your, because I did read the executive summary and some of the other portions that went back to the specific role. And the consultant in particular talked about how to bring groups that traditionally haven't come into the circle, right? I mean, and some of the things were just simple, like people just didn't know. If you come from a different country, for example, and a lot of immigrants, of course, but also people who, I'm from Georgia. We don't have town meetings in Georgia.
Right.
You know, I was born in a small town that has 3,000 people. We do not have a town meeting. Until I got to know, I was like,
The same way.
and they do all this. So I think that education piece is an important piece. So how do you bring someone who normally would not participate in just level? It doesn't have to be politically, it could be social. You know, I know that the churches work very hard to invite people in, because you might be, I don't know, Methodist, but an African Methodist is very different from another. So I'm just saying, so it's that inclusion of how do you start to make policies and decisions that really include the broadest set of people. And even when you don't know what that answer is, of being able to reach out to them to ask. And so, you know, the diversity, equity, inclusion, or DEI, we say is the how those three components work in concert with each other.
And the report itself goes into some detail.
Yes.
These and other definitions.
Yeah.
We thought it was important to level that.
Yeah. So you want to talk about?
I'll do, no. Sure. All right, so we got into this a little bit. In fact, I think actually, you might have covered all of this, but the one thing, that might have been implicit is that the survey really concentrated on the 4 areas of focus that we had as a committee. So it more or less, with some exceptions, tracked those subject matters and people's attitudes around those subject matters. So police and fire, affordable housing, schools, and county government. And I'm just gonna read these. The report has a pretty extensive narrative around the survey results, including the focus group discussions. And the focus group, by the way, they were very valuable, but it was like just 4 people in a group, right? And there were maybe 2 or 3 of them. And so it's not really statistically significant. It's really just a lot of interesting information from residents. So survey results. So first, there's a widespread agreement that Milton was generally unaffordable, and also the Milton must do better to provide affordable housing. By the way, I don't know that any of these are surprising.
I know not for you.
2, there's strong support for increasing the diversity of police and fire departments. I will say that Pat talked about interviews that we had. I must have been on the phone with Chiefs King and Madden 6 or 7 times over the course of the year, and they were very responsive. They're very interested in working through solutions, but it was also very clear that they're coming up against a lot of structural difficulties as they saw it. But that was important. That came out in the survey. 3rd, there's a strong support for police using body cameras, improved diversion of police funding to support youth, substance abuse, and mental health programs. 4th, except for those who have lived in Milton for more than 50 years, respondents largely do not believe that Milton has a sufficiently diverse town government. Next, there was significant variation between respondents who lived longer in Milton, with longer term residents reporting more agreement that the town treats residents fairly. Next, most respondents reported not experiencing discrimination in the town, but for those who did, discrimination on the basis of race was most often cited. And finally, a majority of residents believe that race was an issue, that the town is racially segregated. There's a lot to talk about in the results, but I think one of the most interesting points that came out when we were reading the survey results, and as I read it to you now, is the perception based on residents, period. It's not surprising necessarily, and when I think about my own interactions with residents, especially when I think about my campaign last year, and I think about talking to people, there really is a divergence of attitudes based on my anecdotally, and it seems it's borne out by, I think, the way people perceive the town. So I think that's something to think about. Okay.
We have a hand raised from Keelan.
I don't want to interrupt, but I'm just concerned. Obviously, the whole point of this committee is to get your point across, and it seems that the survey maybe isn't conclusive from a statistical standpoint, but does show a certain number of things. And I'm wondering if it wouldn't be helpful to have a lot of the details of the survey. How many people in the survey, for instance, were residents for over 50 years, and a few of those things, so that the readers can draw some of their own conclusions, because I'm guessing it's going to be a pretty good roadmap. And because otherwise it looks like the report reads to me a little more like an opinion. And I think it's probably easier to sell this if it's based in fact, which it's based on the survey, but I don't see the details of the survey there. Just wonder if you could comment on some of that. Maybe there's a reason you didn't want to, because it's not statistically significant. I don't know.
No, actually, we thought the survey was statistically significant. Because when you do any survey, one of the things that Janelle Lucas was our expert in that, and she was at Leslie College and did a lot of surveys throughout her career as a professor there. So we think that it's representative of towns attitude. Now.
Yeah, what I was saying was just the part. I was talking about the focus group specifically, but go ahead.
Yeah, so we do think that the survey is statistically significant. We looked at the demographics of who filled it out. And the demographics were, and we are definitely, if you look at the larger report, you'll see some of this information inside of it. It does reflect kind of the demographics of the town. in terms of who took the survey. Whether it was length of residency in the town, race, gender, etc. I mean, it's kind of all things. And we didn't ask every question that, you can't say, well, how do you identify? Like, so one of the things that we talked about was, we know about, gender, because we ask people, male, female. But, sometimes you limit yourself even when you do those types of things that seemed obvious to you, right? And we were aware of that. But we do think it was significant. So we don't think it is opinion, but it's the opinion of residents of the town as a whole.
And let me just say a couple things as well, just to add to that. So the report has more detail about the statistics behind the survey. And the raw survey data itself is also available at the clerk's office. So anybody can, it's a public document, anybody can go and take a look at it and make judgments for themselves. I will say the last thing is that, what we're doing here is providing a summary of a narrative. And the narrative provides an explanation of what we think the survey results are. Absolutely, it's interpretive. But frankly, I think it's a fair interpretation, but obviously you can take a look at the stats that are within the report and available to persons.
Chris, what was the significance of the 50-year break point that you mentioned? You said residents will live here over 50 years. Was it 10 to 20 or 20 to 30?
Actually, I don't remember, to be honest with you. I have to look back at how the question was asked. I don't think it was a single demarcation.
No.
Okay, so I'm just wondering.
It was a specific demarcation. I
But
think it
the
was-
significance of 50 was, they sort of fit that category, and I'm just interested in how you picked that.
We didn't pick it. I think that if I recall from the survey, the data was, we asked around demographics, like how long have you been in Milton? And I think it was like under
Yeah,
5 years, 5 to 10.
Right, and that
10
would be,
to 20.
that would be
and then-
important to me to see if you could track the
Right.
difference.
It is, we did that.
If you, the longer you've lived here.
Right, and so it wasn't that we asked, have you been here 1 year and then 50 years? It just so happens that the 50 year.
I just thought it's out when you mentioned there was some sort of significance that I would have missed.
Yeah, no, it was, as Pat was saying, we broke it down that way, and that's where the cleavage became interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think this report would have a much better significant, or more impactful if you did include just like a half a dozen stats in there. Just because it looks like, that's, otherwise it does come off as an opinion and the statistics aren't there. And I think it would be really helpful to be able to say, yeah, here it is, we're backing it up. And if you want to see the full report, then you could go and look at the town clerk's office. But, I just read it and I looked and I said, geez, it doesn't, I'm not so sure where these numbers are coming from. And that's, would be really helpful to see that, because I think it would be much more useful. And I think a lot more people would buy into it. And that's what we.
Understood. Got it. Thank you.
That's very good, very helpful.
So my question was, what is the breakdown in the age group? So what were the cutoffs in the ages, and how many people did you have that responded in each of those age groups
I don't
as
know.
well?
I don't know.
Yeah,
We
we can definitely
look
get
at
to
that, yeah.
that.
can
Because
get,
I think
We
that,
did prepare.
is a factor too,
Yeah. We noted that, it's interesting because we expected that age would make a difference, and, we didn't see as much of a significance difference there. But what we did note was that gender made a difference in some instances,
One thing I'll say about the survey, and I think these are really good questions, and I think digging into the stats is important. And frankly, my hope is that future committees will undertake similar surveys, because, number one, I think it's really, you can learn from past survey mistakes, right? You can always sort of tweak it. Two, I think the more you do it, the more people ultimately respond, because you know what's coming. But three, it will give you trends over time, and I think that's really valuable. Having said all of that, the reason that we undertook the survey is, correct me if I'm misremembering, the reason we undertook the survey is because we had already developed observations and preliminary observations, recommendations, we given some of the select board, and we really wanted to check ourselves. As Pat said, we're a committee of 11 or 12, we're only who we are. And in a lot of ways, what happened with the survey, my recollection is, it supported a lot of the conclusions that we had already come to. I'm not saying that it didn't change it, I think it did affect how we wrote the report, maybe it affected certain recommendations, but it was useful as being a check in telling us that we weren't off track in how we were thinking about what we were presenting to the select board. Ultimately, we're an advisory committee, and we want to make sure that we're getting it as right as we can. So I guess I don't want to lose perspective on what we were trying to accomplish with the survey. And that was, I would say, its primary function.
That's good.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the report. So the final report, sounds like you've all had a chance to take a look at. It had, although it's not as long as the the two primary goals. The first was to inform the select board and Milton residents of the work the committee did, specifically observations, recommendations. And the second was to create a common baseline or understanding around DE&I based on the committee's observations. So there were three key observations. There were many observations in the report, but three that I'll call out here. The first that we made as a committee, so not the survey, it was up to the committee. First, that there's a lack, or the time there was, and can have a conversation about that, which I think over here, lack of any formal commitment to DE&I within Milton. Second is a lack of diversity within town institutions themselves. And the third is that historical patterns have created obstacles to Milton's progress on DE&I, in particular affordable housing. So based on those observations, we had a number of recommendations, but I'll call out 4. And I noticed, by the way, in some of the callouts you wrote on the implementation plan, that there was a lot of affinity between our recommendation, not a lot, but at least some affinity between our recommendations and some of what was in the goals of the implementation plan. So creation of a townwide DE&I statement and policy, and that's been done. Second is creation of a standing DE&I committee appointed by and accountable to the select board with responsibility over DE&I issues. The charter's been voted on and accepted by the select board. Pat and I and Linda Champion are currently members waiting for us to have a quorum. So we're still waiting for the rest of the committee to be appointed. But that looks like it doesn't happen. The third is education and dialogue around affordable housing. That one feels a little bit weaker, but the reason education and dialogue, but the reason it does is because that I think we found it to be such a, it took 18 months just to really understand the problem. And to come up with solutions, I think, for affordable housing, I think it involves a lot of different town bodies doing lots of different things. And so that seems like the first two that I just mentioned were much lower hanging fruit. This is sort of a long-term issue that the town needs to work through. And the last is focus on youth sports because of its importance to children and family in Milton. That's something that's been, I think, good work has been done before. Continuously to do that. I think we talked a little about this.
Yeah, we've talked, so just like, what have we accomplished during our tenure? Chris has already mentioned that the townwide DEI policy got adopted. The new committee is in the process of being set up. There is, and it will be a permanent committee.
Can I interrupt you for a minute? Can you just give a brief overview of the charge of that committee?
And so the committee had a very broad,
The new committee?
the new
Maybe
committee
it's the
had
same
the same
Oh, same
charge.
charge, okay.
It's the
got it.
same chart. Now, that's such a great question, Troy, because one of the things is that we talked about, like, what should that charge be with the select board? And we said, let it be the same as ours, because by looking at the town policy, regulations, and budgets, it really was insightful for us around some of the pieces. You know, as Chris said, there were things that are harder to do. I mean, you all know this, affordable housing in a town like ours is a very tough nut to crack. But it's something that town, from a survey, people said that it's something that we need. Because, you know, we want a town where there's a diversity of economic or financial.
That's part of the solution,
It's a
right?
solution. And
How
so,
does all the Quad B project fit into that, what we're doing right now?
so I would say that I mean, not to, so we were aware, of course, of the
Right.
40B application, but there's some of the places that. The thing that concerned us was that Milton is not meeting its requirement from the
Right.
state.
And even the 40 stuff.
And the 40Bs do not bring it. And I'm gonna misquote it, but when we did the report to get to just the minimum, I think it was 500.
500,
600 units, 500 to 600. I don't trust my memory, but it's over 500.
Right.
And so, it's an interesting thing, and I read that in your report too, is what does the town want to do? Do you want to take control of your own destiny and create this type of affordable housing that you want? Or do you want it to be like sort of forced on you? And so we took that as a very serious challenge and said, we assume, and also we heard through the survey, that people want to have affordable housing. And they want it to be thoughtful and appropriate to, what Milton is.
Well, one of the lingering debates is how much is enough?
Mhm.
Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it 30? Is there a number that would make sense?
There's
I don't think- I'm trying to figure out, I think that's one of the conversations that people can have is what is a good number for a town like Milton for affordable housing? I know, Josh, how many units will we have coming on board if all 40 Bs go through?
If all the 40Bs go through. I don't know what the total number would be.
I
We'd
would,
need those
I would
plus
say-
another like 30 odd.
just so you know, Canton Ave is about 116, East Milton's about 100 or 110.
It's hovering around 300.
Little Ave is 80,
We
so.
did our analysis and we did talk to the town too, to town people. That it said, I think it's like a couple hundred more, even if
Right.
all of them got.
So the way they get counted on the subsidized housing inventory is another thing,
Mhm.
because they, whether they're truly meeting the goal of the state requirement, or they're meeting a different goal of providing affordable housing. Because on the 40Bs, if it's a rental, you count all of the units, even though only 20% are affordable. And the other 80% are market rate. And there's only one of these projects that's being proposed, that's condominium, and that's the one that's just started construction, the Ice House. And so of the 52 units there, I think 14 of them are affordable, and only 14 count on the subsidized housing inventory because of the ownership nature of them. So yes, we'll meet the technical requirements at some point, but it's only because the market rate rentals are counting towards it. So to your question of whether we're meeting, or to your question, whether we're meeting the minimum state requirement or legal requirement versus meeting any other need, that's a factor, yeah.
But shouldn't that be part of the conversation?
We
Yeah.
definitely think it should.
Yeah.
I think that's where you're gonna talk to some people thinking, there's been some movement, even though it hasn't come to fruition yet, towards meeting that number, the state requirement of affordable housing. Some people think that's enough. Is it? I don't know. I mean, that's a conversation.
So,
Also, I think being very generous, I think there's also people who think that is too much.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're right too. I mean, you probably saw that in your survey, that as to what that conversation, that debate would be as to what is the proper level of affordable housing to everyone. And we'll come up with a number, and we just don't know what it is yet.
And I think that that's exactly the point, that we do have to come up with a number. Our concern was that we're not even at the point we were already
Right.
state, which is a very low bar. It is, and I saw it in your report too, is what kind of town do you want to be? Do you want to be a town where people who are teachers and police officers and people who who can afford to live here? Or do you?
our children.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, that was the other thing.
My
Your
children,
child,
yeah.
Outside.
yes, your child, do you want them to have, to be able to at least aspire to a place in Milton? Right now, what we heard And all the data that we looked at, of course, and you all know better than I, that we know what the median house price. And so if you're a first time buyer, or if you're a person who is working in what is a solidly middle class kind of career path, a lot of our town workers can't afford to live here. So.
So one thing I would say about the housing suggestion is housing is one of the major components of the master plan. There's also the housing production plan that ties into our temporary safe harbor through what was called the HCD, now there's an
EOHLC.
And there's really just a lot of discussion about what is affordable also, because you have a lot of seniors who are sort of locked into the homes that they have because there's really no other option for them. If they sell, how does that work out for them? Where do they go? And so you have sort of the cost burden of carrying a single family in terms of tax revenue on a fixed income, et cetera, because they're sort of without an option of something else. So there's that end of affordability. There's the affordability of the workers, like you speak to the people who work here, people who work at the hospital and so forth. That feeds into traffic in my view, because if people can't afford to live here, they're driving here to work. And are driving through. And so but the housing, so I think there is this piece of the 40B and the 10% mandate, but there's the other piece that's come out in lots of plans is that there's really now the price points have gotten so that it's hard to establish a new household. So when we say our kids, we're talking about young families, right? I mean, so maybe it's a couple that's not having a child yet, but they're thinking ahead to that. And the price points have gotten such that it's, you have to have a pretty good income to have an entrance. So is there what they used to call starter homes? So there was a housing committee that the select board had put together that produced the housing production plan that Melinda Collins, former select board member, worked a lot on. And she talked about that. There's no such thing as a starter home anymore, because even subdivision, the planning board approves, which are the houses that get built on these small lots are quite large and quite expensive. Like, for example, the ones over off of Pleasant that are well over $1 million. So any of our new production is really out of reach. So there's lots of components to affordable housing. And it's a big challenge, but I think it is definitely one that needs. We're going to have a discussion about housing as a topic here too, because that's such a major part of the plan. But it's multifaceted, as you said, and it's complex, really complex.
And we talked about elders too in the housing.
Yes.
And because if you can't, especially as folks have their children going home out here. And but it doesn't, what do you do with a 3-5 bedroom house when you're a single person or a couple?
Where it is someplace to go, obviously, but one of the things that compounds that is that you're talking about affordable, if you're selling your home, if you've lived there for 30-40 years, you're walking out with a pretty good size of cash. But that, now you qualify as an affordable rental.
You may not qualify as an affordable renter, but what we heard from people, which was shows that is what sounds like a lot of money, but to stay in town. We all know what, as you said, was the condominiums cost. The money that looks like a lot of money on paper.
Right.
May not be enough to buy one of the
But that's
condominiums.
interesting, I didn't think it's that one, but that's.
May not, I mean, we've heard that. Yeah.
Or it takes a large percentage of that if that's
If
the
you're
primary.
talking rentals, you're going in, you're renting at $5,000 to $3,000 a month.
Yeah, the only rentals, Milton Hill House has rentals.
Well, it's not going to 1,100,
Yeah,
right?
yes, there'll be more rentals coming on the market. That's
And then
and with the 40B.
there's one up on Blue Hill Avenue, is going to be coming on
There'll
board
be
as
rentals
rental,
as well.
right?
Yeah,
And that one down to you, I think it's also rental.
yes,
Yeah, Brush Hill, Amore Road, those will be rentals
So,
too.
again, I'm just saying, there will be some rental properties that will dovetail into one of the issues that I believe that is a big issue, getting people out of their homes. You know, when you need a four-bedroom house, my wife and I have this conversation all the time, but I need someplace to go, right?
Yeah,
If
the
you wanna
mark,
stay in
If you want to
Milton.
stay, go.
And even not just in Milton, it's the greater Boston. area.
Right,
I mean, so
Right.
you'd have to move pretty far out, and that's what we've heard, I'm sure that we've had the conversation with your wife about. Yes, my house is worth, let's say, $1 million, and so you got $1 million now, except for the condominium cost. $985,000. And so we can trade one for the other. Yeah, but that is the reality, we're looking at something.
I know what you're saying, I agree.
So, did I?
I was gonna add on to the conversation about affordable housing units and how some of them are coming online, but some of them also have a sunset. Right? But some affordable housing is temporary, like they just
no, I mean, they're not allowed that sensitive.
Yeah, the deed restricted affordable housing. is
Yeah.
not-
It used to be that they sunset.
It's- you mentioned it's,
There's been no-
How long it takes between like the permit and
I
the
don't know.
special permit being issued and the building permits, but that's where
That's
sometimes
where-
the SHI counts shift. Because you only get those units on for a year, and if you don't get your building within that day, or take them on.
So if there's a legal challenge, even just getting a building permit, it can take a year by the time they get the zoning approval. And there's no legal challenge, just to get their architectural and engineering drawings done and the permit pulled. That can take a year. But if there's a legal challenge, then it could take longer, then that means they fall off. Those, you know, so that, as we say, fall off the subsidized housing inventory, so the SHI. And once they fall off, then it affects our temporary safe harbor. And it's a moving target until we get really, well, I think a decent number above 10% because of that, until they're all built.
Yeah.
And once they're all built, then it's a different story, but there's a question whether all of them will get built. I think the economics or you have to look at multifamily these days. The valuations I was reading are going down, like office going down. I mean, you're in the multifamily
Yeah.
management, right? Are you seeing that?
Multifamily is still going relatively strong.
So what I was reading.
Like
maybe could
rents
be
are
just a snapshot. Yeah.
petering off a little bit. for sure,
Yeah. So I don't know, what drives some people to invest in these multifamilies at this scale? I mean, some of it is that they want to sell to the capital markets once they're stabilized. So what's the return at the capital market? And most of these people aren't interested necessarily, these companies aren't interested in the provision of affordable housing, with the exception of like the nonprofits. So Winter Valley had HUD financing, and then they got to that 30-year mark. And where they had to refinance, and if they didn't refinance again with like the HUD, then those could have fallen off, maybe that's what you're thinking.
Yeah, I think that's
But they
what
did refinance,
But they were required.
no, they were not required to. And then we approved zoning change and, sorry, Charlie Horse. And then we approved, I think it's 36 new units. That's 100% affordable, age restricted. Well, the other thing about Milton is almost all of our units are age restricted, so that's
88.
another, how much?
Julie Kramer of the Affordable Housing Trust said it was 88% of our.
Yeah.
Virtually all.
Is.
Virtually all, yeah.
So all of these things came up in our conversations, and I know they've come up in your conversation, they come up with, affordable housing plus and everybody else too. Those are, getting back to your point, those are pieces that the town, it's worth having that conversation.
Yes.
And so part of, so I think that we're all in agreement with you that we need as a town to have this conversation. But to also not just have the conversation, but to come to some conclusion. So first of all, we did 2 steps. We said, let's get to the minimum first, at least, because we weren't at the minimum. And so at least then we can have that next dialogue about, well, what do you want to do?
Well, let's get back to your comments on having a common goal,
Yeah,
and bringing people together to have this conversation.
yeah.
Might be awkward at times, but it's an important conversation.
And one of the things that we found too was that, to Jim's point, people are, and I know this in the planning document, people are afraid of change. And your document speaks about maintaining the character of Milton. And I'll say that one of the things that we talked a lot about was that a lot of times that's code or something. So,
Mhm.
you know, we have to be very careful sometimes about language. So when you say, so as you think about like preserving the character as a phrase of the town, it seems benign, but it's not. Because when we talk, and we had some of this in the focus groups, this is one of the things that it doesn't mean what maybe you. Well-intentioned folks would meant. And so those are some of the things that we would say, you know, to start to think about. Like, what is your language? Because, you know, and some different people hear that differently. And even when people want to have change, it's like, I want change, but I want it over there and not necessarily next door to me.
Yeah, if I just think I'm more concrete, I think one of the things that people hear when you hear something like preserving character and homeless, no multifamily homes, minimize affordable housing, no discussions about their housing. Right, I mean, those are the kinds of things I think that it feels coded to say.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important.
Good point.
Yeah, oftentimes what people say to the planning board is keeping the character. Sometimes it's a physical character that they're thinking of, but that physical character comes with a price, you know, so large lot sizes means increased cost, for example.
In the streets with no parking, means the need for driveways and more space on each lot.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things I think that that can be considered, what people do really value. And then how do you incorporate other things that are necessary or desirable, and yet actually can quantify what does character mean, or what does keeping the character, what does that really mean without having the unintended consequence that you speak of. So that is the choice of words. You know, those words were 10 years ago, choice of words, which, as we know, people began to have a different awareness sometime, you know, especially around DEI, I think, in some of those words. But I think even now, people have different opinion of what that character is, what protecting the character really means. I think today they do.
I agree, and I think so that one of the things that we can have a conversation is about what is important, and I think in the report, it's your report, it says that, like, what is it? There are values that I'm sure maybe that we do agree. People move to Milton, those of us who moved here, for a reason, but what was that? And is it no multi-family housing? I mean, it didn't occur to me that would be what it meant, but it means different things, and I think a conversation. So I think that when you talk about like the iteration about it becoming more concrete is not necessarily we have the answer, but what is the process for us to get there as a town together?
Good point.
It is what I would ask, because as I said, we don't presume to be DEI. I mean, I'm not finance.
I'm just a wolf.
He's a
Well.
But everybody has their lived experiences, right? Regina, did you?
Yeah, and I think very similar to what DEI means to different people, preserving the character of traditions is something that has a shifting baseline depending on where you started, right? So if you moved here, was born here, and have lived here for 50 years, the Milton that you know and remember that was seminal in your development is, it's kind of like the music that you listen to that you would consider traditional, or, your music is often what you listened to when you were in your teenage years, right? And that sets you up for a lot of your thinking around music, and the same thing is true for what your town looks like what is home, right? And what are the characteristics? And so I think what we're seeing is an evolution of, with each generation that lives here, they're seeing that snapshot be whatever it was when they started observing the town of Milton,
And plus now they're.
just like
Yeah, and now they're increasing pressure from the state as well,
Mhm.
bipartisan pressure from the state, which are not going to go away. But one thing too, and I wanted to make sure to call this out.
I know.
Was on what the town looks like. So one of the recommendations that we had in our report, I saw was something that was reflected in the implementation goals, which was a committee makeup. This was really important to us, because committees need to reflect, committees are appointed by the select board or by the town moderator. They need to reflect what the town looks like. I think, it was important in our recommendations. I saw it in the email. I think I just.
We went through our own experience with that, a year ago, this last year. And when we added 2 members, with an idea for broadening, diversity, and that became a question of what do you mean by diversity?
Yeah.
And so that's just, we experienced this ourselves on this committee, and that resulted in us getting Regina and Warren. But it was a discussion that we had as a committee, in looking at what our charge is towards getting towards the end of it, and how can we make sure that we have enough diversity of experience and thought and areas of town that people live in, and backgrounds and so forth. So I think if we look at now what the article that established the committee at town meeting defined as the qualities of the people that were to be on the committee, and we didn't seek to change them, but I think we thought maybe we might in the next iteration of a committee, if we're going to implement the plan, because we were thinking that it had subject matter expertise as the primary criteria. Remember, like an architect, a real estate engineer, et cetera, rather than a sort of a broader set of subject. So that is something, when you talk about committee makeup, is something that we've been thinking about as well, and hopefully, one of the challenges, I think, is like, how do you reach out, how do you meet the people, and then get a comfort level and recruitment, right, of people to serve on committees, right? That's, I don't know if you've tackled that.
Well, we had some thoughts in the report we put in. I know that the town administrators when putting out emails, I've seen advertisements in the Milton Times. I've seen the town administrator reach out to Mark and to other groups. So I don't think anybody's cracked this nut, but I do know that it's not a fix tomorrow kind of thing. I think it's got to be long-term outreach. It's got to be a long-term. We want you as part of this committee. We want having reach out, having communication. It's a constant thing.
It's so important because not even on the committees alone, because we talk about what do we want as a town. Well, if we're only hearing from a slice of the town and not all the slices, then we could be perpetuating an inequity because we're not hearing from those folks. So reaching those folks is at all levels of government.
And not knowing what expertise you have. I mean, let me just say this real quick. I'm sorry. I just think it's really important. And I think the diversity of thought issue is very important. 15% of the town is Black. That's a huge slice of the town. And I think that, I think we should be open-eyed and explicit about making sure that we're recruiting Black residents to the committee, because it's a huge slice of the town. You've got a lot of expertise there, with a lot of diverse backgrounds, and I don't think we should be ignoring that.
Can we expand your group a little bit? Are there any days in that group? Because that's I think that's one of the fastest growing populations in this town.
Yes, we did have.
Okay, because I think that's important.
We had, and I would say the same thing. rather say, I mean, Black is certainly because of Milton's current demographics,
Right.
you know, there is, as you said, Asians are growing. The Latino population is also here and needs to be represented appropriately. But not just that, and I think that so you just said, I think we have to think as, why do we need, the committees to be diversified? It's not because we're nice people, it is because you can, so you just said, maybe we are perpetuating the same system. And so our committee that's part of our charge, is to tell you, we are perpetuating it. And it's not that we are doing it out of evil intent, nobody's saying anybody's doing it out of evil intent. But when you don't have younger voices on committee, when you don't have voices of people coming from different places, and I know that we had this, but it's not just Black. A lot of the town members now who are Black are immigrants. That is a I'm from Georgia. My family's been here for generations, and I still don't understand New England, so forget about.
But you do let me know, yeah.
Caucus. I'm just saying, so I think though that we need to think about, like, how do we, just make an assumption that if we get the same people, if you don't have younger voices on the committee. I mean, look, as a person who's somewhat older myself, I know that I'm gonna think about protecting whatever it is that I think is worth protecting, and which may block out younger voices.
Right.
So I think we gotta think about it.
How do you kind of define, like, I understand this is a fluid process, it's gotta evolve, it's gotta grow. How do you kind of define, you know, when you're getting closer to being more successful, when we have a demographic description of the town of Milton, and then we say that everybody by their statistical inclusion is representative? Like, how do we define
So I
that?
would say that's a good place to start. Because I think that one of the things is that if you're truly, and I know maybe Chris, you said this, and Cheryl, you too, it's a practice, right? Is how do you feel comfortable being at a table? If you're the only person on the warrant committee who's under 50, might not be so comfortable, especially when they have, you know, because by definition, I'm over 50, so of course I'm gonna be like, well, I have the expertise. But it's also very uncomfortable as a person of color. It's also uncomfortable as a woman. It's also uncomfortable as an LGBTQ person to have people talking around. And so, but how do you get that? Is to actually start inviting some of those classes of people to be there, because by having them, that will make it more comfortable for them. It will also encourage other people to join. One of the things that we've heard in the survey from people of color in particular, that it's not that anybody told them that they couldn't join something. It's just that they didn't feel comfortable being in certain spaces. And so I think that we have to just say that.
I remember just one quick check. I remember as a young architect, I went to a meeting of the Boston Society of Architects Urban Design Committee. And this other young person and I were treated so poorly because we were young. And it really steered me away from that organization for some time. And, you know, I'm not the demographic necessarily that gets discriminated against in that way very often, right? But architecture, when I started, was a pretty male field. And to have young women sitting in what was this older men's domain, maybe made them feel as if we didn't belong there. But so there's, as you said, the belonging piece of it goes in many different directions. And I think the young people piece of it is something that decisions like that are made long-term decisions, those are the decisions that are going to impact their lives.
Right.
Those of us who are older, you know, we won't be around forever, right? So the long-term decisions, let's say like on climate change or on zoning and planning, which could take decades, you know, to really see implemented. It's the young people who will feel that. And so finding ways, you know, to have them engaged, I agree, is really important. And I just want to do a time check, and I know everybody has, it's been a great discussion. I like Roxanne.
So I had a couple of points. One was, so with regards to committees, so we, at the select board level, we have redone the packet for people that want to apply for a committee. And we've done some guidelines with it. And so basically, there's actually a section that says, you know, that like basically anybody and everybody should and can apply and will not be discriminated based on your age, your sex, sexual preference, race, ethnicity, any of those things. So there is a specific line in that, and so people can apply. And I know the town administrator has done a pretty good job about, you know, sending out on the website in different, you know, areas and so forth. So I think probably in the past couple of years since when you did your report, I think that is an improvement, I would say. I think the other thing to mention is that the town had paid for a consultant for DEI to come in, and then that should be mentioned too, because I understand that there are some programs and things for employees and different things that are being done now with regards to DEI through that. So I think that's important. And then on a separate note, there was something that you had said about like preserving the character and things like that. And I guess what I would say with that is, you know, I think there are a lot of assumptions made that if somebody says that a certain person, if I said it versus you said it, like I think there are assumptions being made about people. And I think that it takes away from the one-to-one talking about what that means, because I think that people are sort of being pigeonholed if they say a certain thing that they must mean this, or if they're over 50, or live to over 50, they must mean that. And so I just don't want to see that type of a thing going on, because I think that's counterproductive.
So Roxanne, I would exactly agree with you on that. However, one of the things that I wanted to say, or what I was trying to make it is that is language matters. And so being explicit about what you need, like when I read about, and I think a lot of people do. So if you say, I want to preserve the character of the town, not just say that. What do you mean by that? And so I think if you're saying, you know, this is a small town, 3 schools, you know, do you want, what is it that means? Because I think that for a lot of people, let's not forget the history, because our report talks about the history. You know, this town has a history of redlining. It has a history of, you know, the zoning is not, you know, it's there for a reason.
And there's a systemic.
And there's a systemic process.
Lingering.
And now the people who were putting those pieces in place, some of them were very specific about why they were putting some of the zoning in place. It was to keep out, you know, people who were undesirable, whether they were Jews or blacks or whoever. But I think that we need to sort of face that kind of a thing. But you're right. Like when you say preserve the character, that's why I say, what's the conversation about? What do you mean when you say that? And the point I was making is be careful, because there are codes in all of our language. And I'm trying not to use an obvious political example, but when someone says the nostalgia of it's like it was in the 50s is what I want. I don't want to be in the 50s as a woman, as a black person, but I think so. I'm just saying, what is it about the 50s? There was some things that are about it, right? That were great. And so I think that if you're right about that, like just be aware, and I'm saying as a committee, have that discussion, lead the discussion about what is it that the town is trying to be. And you've talked about like, you know, is it a number? Are we happy having 10% of our housing? Because that's the, you know, however it's calculated, but that's the state number. is open space, is our commitment to the environment, all those
We have to
things.
decide our values.
We have to explain our values, and that was why it was important to us to have a DEI statement, because it starts to talk about the values of the town. It says that all of us are important, that we're all equal. In the eye of the government, at least the town government, so.
Catherine, which question, although I'd love to end on that, on the form.
Yeah.
One of the things that the committee recommended was the collection on a voluntary basis of demographic information so that the town could keep stats. Was that also? added to-
So with anything on those forms, they were reviewed by town council.
Okay,
So the way that those forms are, and we discussed them in town
was
council.
that one of the
reviewed them.
things that was discussed by town council?
There was at one point something about that, but the thought was, if this is not first of all, it's not a job, you know, so it's not like a human resource issue. And it was felt to keep, like, from my understanding, because again, he reviewed them, to do it the way we have it now.
So,
But we, I mean, certainly we know, like, by what you're saying, where you live, you're in precinct 10, or you're in, that type of thing.
Yeah, I
But-
mean, collecting that information, I think is so important. It might be worth revisiting,
Yeah.
because I don't know that the town can make meaningful progress along these lines unless we actually have the data.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, I know some people apply for the warrant committee and had said that they weren't selected. And so, like, what's the demographic of the people who applied for, and then comparing that to who gets selected? And I'm just mentioning warrant committee because that's anecdotal that I've heard from some folks. But it would, I do think it's if you're getting a larger pool of candidates for committees, that's wonderful, right?
Well, it's hard to know for
So,
people.
yeah.
Like, are we making progress with the fact that town administrators reaching out to so many different people? It's great. And you're right, that is a change. Is it actually attracting a different
More,
pool of
right.
people? And that's hard to know with that.
And
All right, so I'm
But
gonna
again,
have to,
that's looked at by,
application.
No, it is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but
I know that.
I'm gonna have to do my
All right.
chair job.
We're happy to come back.
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, Will, would you like to come on up? And I understand Chris is also with us on the screen.
Yeah, well, Will is also on the screen. I'm on.
Share screen, I'm on.
There he is, though. I don't see Chris in here, though. And I know she said she was tuning in from elsewhere tonight. So thank you, Will, and for the work that you've been doing on the topic of the parking needs of the library. So you're gonna give us some more information.
Sure, I can just get the slideshow started for you. First of all, thanks for letting me visit with you tonight. And I'll just add to the conversation you've just been having. I was listening to it online, and then when I was in here, I've had the privilege of being on the town employee DEI steering committee. And, I can just confirm, there's been a number of trainings, both for managers and for all employees in the town, and that's a huge improvement over where we were a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So that is also progressing, but
Great,
I digress. I'm here to talk
thank you for
that. And again, I know that Chris Hodlin and some other trustees, I think Jim Potter was here at a couple of meetings, and I just wanted to kind of give an update on some of the metrics that we've been asked about, just to give some context to also like the parking surveys that have gone on, probably since this board met. So for about the last 10 years, parking has been a conversation for the library, for the trustees, for myself. And there's 4, topics that come up, and it's safety, both within the lot and just the whole Canton Ave corridor. Capacity and convenience, so how many spaces, how close it is for people with strollers, people with walkers. And then growth, our programming and room usage is limited by the current number of spaces in our parking lot. So just looking at a little bit of the history too, in the last 10 years or so, working with the planner, town planner, working with town engineers, working with the traffic commission. We've made some decisions and some changes, including reversing the direction of traffic within the lot. That was in response to accidents on Canton Avenue, which has improved. We also created a turnaround within the parking lot, which has also improved traffic flow. And then we added spaces on Canton Avenue, just for some overflow parking spaces. So current conditions, the levels fluctuate day to day, time of day. They're, often informed by what's going on at the library that day. Parking lots near capacity at busy times, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Another thing that's affected us is the lack of public spaces. So there's no more clubs like the Lucid Club. There's the town hall only has so many spaces. So we've taken on a lot more boards, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, that kind of thing. Trying to use our spaces, and it's come back now since in the year since COVID there. So that's also been met with a demand for more programming, particularly children's programming in the mornings, and programming for all ages in the evenings. And that's where a lot of our parking constraints already exist. So we looked at 3 different metrics that kind of how we look at the usage of the library. We broke things down into an hourly grid system similar to what the parking survey did. And this is how we always look at our stats anyway. One is book checkouts and returns. These are people in the building at that time of day checking out books. And we had a full fiscal 22 year average to look at that. We track Wi-Fi usage in the building, and that we have a monthly snapshot. So that shows how many people are physically parked in the building, not necessarily with their cars, but in the building. And then programming, how many times a particular time slot was used for programming or a meeting during an average month so far through this through calendar 23. So it's different snapshots, but they all kind of tell a little bit of a story here. And I shared the horrible charts, so I'll just talk about them without going into the specifics. I tried to show kind of a little bit of a heat map of when the busiest times of day are for checkouts. Those morning time slots are when we have the majority of our children's program. The afternoons are busy with people coming after school on their way home from work. That's a heavy time spot. And then Tuesday evenings, you could build a 3-story garage on Tuesday evenings, and sometimes it wouldn't be enough. If it was just a busy, that's our jackpot.
Why is that?
We have all our meeting rooms used every Tuesday night, no matter what. Yeah, so if we have people who play whist on Tuesday nights. Am I right? Whist. I think that's right. Yeah, and we have an adult program usually that night, meeting group. It's just people are wondering, Tuesdays that night. I don't know.
Tuesdays and a Friday.
Wi-Fi usage, again, you kind of see that afternoon up to dinner time block is when we're busiest with people coming in, plugging in. Program counts. So this is a little harder to get the hotspots where you can again see Tuesday night, you can see most evenings, and then you'll see the mornings where we have the children's programs. The afternoons are when we have a lot of our teen programs, especially Tuesday afternoons is a busy time for our teen programming. And then this last slide is, I tried to take all 3 metrics. And if they showed, if a time slot showed up on all 3 of those metrics as being busy, it's got a number 3. If it showed up on 2 out of 3, so on, right? So most of the times a day, fortunately, 9 to 10 is morning's pretty slow. So if the librarians and myself come in a little groggy, we've got a little bit of time before it's busy. But otherwise, it's those afternoon times, evening times have been the ones that are considered pretty busy. So work's been done in the last 10 years to improve safety, to build some capacity on Canton Avenue. The planning department has done a survey of not just the library, but of the town center, which has been helpful. And I wanted these metrics kind of add some context to what's happening in the library. Several busy times have been identified, and I should say, it would be easy to say, let's just move when we do the programming, but we do the programming at the time, people are available, and the children's programming is before nap time, before families have to go pick kids up at school, so that we're limited to that time. And then after work, when we do our adult programming, that's why things happen at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. I think it goes without saying that the trustees and myself are committed to working with the master plan committee here, other town departments and committees as we move forward in this process. That was my brief update. I just wanted to, I know there's been conversations around parking, the library, the town center, and I just wanted to kind of give you a perspective of what we see as the busy spots and how we measure that internally within the library.
Well, you mentioned that you were going to touch on potential programming, like new programming. I think whether it was Chris or someone else who mentioned that you couldn't add some programming because you didn't feel there was parking. Can you just touch on that a bit?
Yeah, so a lot of it, it's different times of day, especially the mornings, like the 10 to 12 spot. There's a waiting list for most of our children's programming. So we can't add any programming in those morning spots because there isn't parking. We already have, parents and caretakers in Canton Ave. They used to have to park across over here at Town Hall once in a while. And we have, in those morning time spots, we have other spaces so that we can do more programming, but we don't have the space that, I should say, we have other meeting room spaces in the building so that we could go back to back to back. We usually do 2 every morning. And we need time for one program to clear out so the next group can come in and get parking for the next program. So with additional parking, we could add another program to that slot. Or we can, piggyback and use multiple rooms to do the overflow of the people wanting to come in. Similar in evenings, there are nights that we turn away groups who want to book a room because we know we're going to have a large event or a program that will have draw 50 plus people. That also goes for Saturdays a lot, where we try not to double book programs. We have some groups, well, I'll say this, we particularly try not to book meeting rooms on Wednesday mornings, because that's been one of our busiest, and I was in the slides, programming times. We have groups like the Women's Club or the Garden Club that book morning slots, and we have to sometimes turn people away depending on if we're having children's programming. We can't do both. And there is a demand for both. So.
I have a quick question. Where do the employees park? Do they park there or do they park across the street, or where are they parking?
So they generally park in the parking lot or on Canton. There's also 3 or 4 staff who walk on a regular basis. But that's where, yeah.
So during the day, for the staff that does park, the staff that's on, like, what would be the maximum number that would be in the lot? I'm just trying to get a sense.
Yeah.
How many of those spots might be taken by staff?
Right, that's fair. So right now, there's 20 people on staff. There's never 20 of us in the building. At most, we'll probably have 12 to 15. And of those, usually 2 to 3 are walking. Some are get rides as well. That's probably, so I'd say the max would be 8 to 10. And when we started this conversation, and I'll go in the Wayback Machine, we had started a conversation about this, and we thought about having a parking lot on Reedsdale to the side of the library. And that's conservation land. It's not appropriate now, but that would have been like a staff parking lot that would have been perfect, right?
How many total spots are there?
That's a great question. I don't know.
I can find it. No is a strong
I
word.
think it's
58.
Thank you.
Not that you needed.
And there's probably another 20 on Canton, something like that.
That's it, there too.
There are 20 on Canton,
Yeah.
keep me around, there you go.
13 before.
Sorry, Chris, we couldn't hear that.
I thought you said there were 13 spots on Canton Ave at the last meeting, but
There may have been 13 cars parked on Canton Ave. The analysis both for daytime and evening counts has 20.
oh, 20, okay, sorry.
Has the library looked at the programming schedule and made any kind of adjustments that might even out the usage of the facilities?
Yeah, no, we've looked at it and we've added things on Saturday to try to take the onus off weekdays. But what's happened is Saturdays just fill up too. We tried to spread out the time in between children's programs during the mornings. But what that does, we still have the same number of programs. It just makes getting in and out a lot easier. It keeps us from still adding another program. And then, I mean, that's basically all we've been able to do so far, yeah.
I've heard at one of our prior meetings also that there are people parking in the parking lot to use Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
Is that something that could be addressed to possibly alleviate?
yeah, that's a good one, that's a hard one. If there is, there's usually only one or two people, and they're often there in the mornings and at night, not necessarily all day long, but that's something we could look at, yeah.
One could think of that though as one of the users of the library. I mean, if they don't have access to internet else, otherwise, unless it's just somebody on their way to and from someplace else and popping in. But, you know, if it is a Milton resident taking advantage of that service, it's a service.
Sure, but maybe they could do Wi-Fi at town hall.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think that started partially because during COVID, we put 3 boosters outside the building so that we would
Yeah.
come to the library as a spot, you know, and some people just kept doing that.
You build it, they will
I
come.
know.
Has the Saturday now, oh, sorry, Tabor, yes, go ahead, Tabor.
Actually, Warren just grabbed that one question about the Wi-Fi. I thought, you know, if it's only 2 or 3 people, that's not a big deal, but then again, 2 or 3 extra parking spaces could make a little bit of a difference. So I don't know if that's a possibility either at the town hall or, you know, asking the churches to, you know, if the town were to pay for it outside one of the churches or something during other hours. I mean, there's it seems like a lot of different ways you could cut that and maybe have some benefit. The other question I had was, I think on the parking issue, it seems worse on Tuesday afternoons. And I'm sure, you know, maybe the kids have all got sports on Wednesdays or something, and Mondays are off on holidays. But it does seem like there might be a way to spread some of that out a little bit off the Tuesday. And I'm sure you've thought of it. I'm just wondering why that just seems to pile up on Tuesday. It just must be the most convenient day of the week.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think it is the most convenient day of the week. People don't plan meetings, at least at the library on Monday nights a lot of time. Tuesday afternoons has become our most popular team programming day, and that's just been by topic, and that's just the way it's worked out. I also think that we kind of go back and forth with the teen center, what kind of programming on what day, so we try not to double up on things. But yeah, we continue to look at ways to, you know, alleviate the strain. Tuesdays, and you'll notice it even for, you know, library checking out books. Monday and Tuesday are the busier nights, and then it slows down. By Thursday, nobody wants to have a meeting anymore, and that's just the way it's been, but.
Well, these meetings were library related, I mean,
Yeah.
you mentioned a list.
Sure, so it's a combination, right? So we have, generally speaking, we have 2 meetings. We have a large meeting room, we have a conference room. We also use our story hour room, and then some other ad hoc spaces. It's a combination of library sponsored programs, which could be speakers or movies,
Right.
children's programs, but it's also, could be youth soccer board.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get at, I'm trying to figure out that type of usage, it
Yeah.
seems like, you're providing something that I don't think the library was initially
Right.
intended for.
It's-
With the women's club gone, the
Right.
Olympic club gone, and a lot of these normal meeting places are gone by the wayside. that all of a sudden we're putting more pressure on you, which exacerbates your parking problem.
Right, and so that's absolutely right. It's become kind of a community hub. It's like, there really aren't any of these places left where you. can-
Right, which I think is a whole other problem that we've been sort of talking about.
Well, there's one thing,
Yeah.
yeah, the fire station, the
Right.
fire station
Yeah.
here, that first floor room where this committee did talk with the fire building committee, fire station building committee some time ago about how much time would the fire department really needed for training and how much
Right.
could be used for community space.
No,
It would be great, yeah.
Even town boards and committees.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of the idea, that kind of, you know, but you deal with your issues, your problems,
Yeah.
and then deal with some of the other problems, that it doesn't seem, a lot of it is really to do with you.
Well, and I think this is really interesting as we think about town center overall. The first thing I wrote down here was about the community space. Because that is a part of this, considering how town center is used.
Yeah.
And if some offload of meetings is there on this side of the street where there is parking, then that's beneficial in terms of use of this parking at night. Doesn't help during the day because this parking lot's full during the day for town hall users. So this kind of calendar of use, I think, needs to be looked at. And Saturdays, this isn't in use much either. So if there are some of those groups that want to meet on Saturdays and there's a space available here, that could help with that.
Yeah.
Won't help the mornings and the teens in the afternoon, but
Yeah, and we sometimes advertise or suggest for Saturday for weekend programs that they look across the street. And the other thing about these meetings that we host, and that's what the library is, like a community hub or community center, it's one-stop shopping, and that they might come for a meeting but do something else, or they might leave their kids in the teen room and go to a meeting at that night. So it is a
Yeah.
convenience factor for people too.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, and this is parking adjacent, those hot spots in the afternoon. Oftentimes we have a fairly full parking lot, but we also have drop off, pickup. So it's a heavily, used time of the day, not just for staying, but for driving through the parking lot in the afternoons.
do you hear from people about parking challenges?
Yes, it's every survey that we've done as a library, the last 10 years, parking has been one of the top 3 things that people say we can improve.
I have a quick question. So 2 comments. So Cheryl already had mentioned it about, once they open up in the back there for the, fire station, that will, I think, help alleviate some of it. The other question I have is, has there been any outreach to the church over here? Because my thought was if there was some way to do some parking there, you also at least already have a crosswalk down at Thatcher. I know it's a little far down, but you could, if you were parking in that lot, you could at least cross over and walk up. Like in a daytime program or something. I'm just thinking if the parking lot, for instance, right now, if the parking lot is full and somebody wants to, it's a nice day and somebody wants to go to a program, if you park in that church parking lot where during the day, it doesn't seem like there's often a lot of people parking there, then you at least have the light there and the crosswalk right now to use. And you could use it and then walk up. Just a thought. I don't know if that's ever been considered.
Not,
Or even for your employees,
Yeah, not
I'm
fine.
thinking, the daytime at least or something, to alleviate a few spots. I wonder if that could be an option.
yeah, we haven't looked into that before, so.
Yeah,
Cheryl,
Well,
can I
yeah.
ask a question?
Sure.
Sorry, my hand has been up, but I don't know if anybody's watching.
I can't see it, so sorry, Chris.
Sorry, nobody, I guess nobody is.
I'm gonna peer over Josh's shoulder to see it. Now I see it.
I can
Okay.
see it.
Anyways, thank you. I just want to just make a couple comments. So, one is in related to the people using the parking lot for a Wi-Fi service. I mean, that is a library service that we provide and people have the ability and should be able to park in the parking lot. Certainly, there are maybe other places they can use Wi-Fi, but there's specific services that they can only get at the library, like ancestry.com. I mean, there's things that they have to use the library specific Wi-Fi to get access to. So, and I think that's probably a very minimal part of our parking problem. There may be 1, maybe 2 people that go there once in a while. We don't have people sitting in the parking lot all day, using Wi-Fi. And I think the fact that the library has become a community hub is awesome. And we shouldn't be discouraging people from using the library and the facilities there. It's a beautiful building, and it was built intentionally to draw people besides just library patrons in to use the building, like groups and other people. So, and the facility, the Keys room downstairs has a lot of special features about it that are really needed by some of those meetings and those groups. The screens, the technology that's available. And those are all things that were built by the town of Milton for this particular purpose. So I don't think trying to discourage people from not using the library is a way necessarily to solve our parking problems. Although, I appreciate that we could look at some other, potential short-term options. And maybe touching base with the church is something that we can look at. But so I just wanted to say that. And initially, I think, Will and I wanted to put together today kind of the current parking. And I think what we can probably add to this data that's on here, it doesn't have the numbers that Josh had before, which was the number of parking spots. It's more percentages. But what we'd like to do is to come back either in July or at your next meeting, maybe in September, with the future. Because as he said, we're turning away people that want to use the library because we don't have the parking. And you don't see that on this data. So we didn't want to bombard you with everything tonight. We thought we would just start with the current usages and then come back to you with, if we had more parking, this is what else we would like to offer. And that we have the staff to support, but we don't have the parking to support. So anyways, just wanted to add that. Thank you.
What are the options for additional parking? What am I missing here?
So there has been the Bowler survey work at 40 Howland Street. We saw there was an additional survey proposal that they gave us a few days ago. That their invoice came in, it was at 1,500 as was expected, and so thank you all for doing that extended contract with them. That has a parking sort of a new lot as a potential, and then there are opportunities for better usage at town center, right? We did our evening analysis Wednesday before last. One of the things we found was that almost a third of the spots that are being used in the employee lot, which is about 34 spots, are being used by essentially stationary municipal vehicles overnight. So these are used for inspectional services or our assessors. A lot of fire vehicles were there as part of the sort of construction. And so there's an opportunity maybe to rethink how we use these sort of more stationary evening vehicles and ensure they're either in the back of the lot or in other sort of less desirable spaces.
But let me back you up. How many spaces on this new survey that was done?
So it's the same amount of spaces as previous.
I mean, the survey or the site plan from.
Well, the new site plan, the one we contracted with. How many spaces?
There was 20 on the
20
first floor, if there was a cafe there, and then a level below that has 30. So it depends whether you build above it, how much demand for parking is there for the use above, but that footprint. That I had showed you that I did and said we were gonna have the engineers do a check on it. They came back basically with the same, so the thing about that plan versus the two that they provided before
Right.
was it doesn't go as deep or as low down the slope, and its footprint isn't for just drive and getting in is much smaller. If you want to lengthen it, to make more spaces, That's possible, but you start getting infringing more, the slope sort of starts to come in, so
As
that,
does the water.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So
you have-
there are no conservation, we're not gonna run into.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, it's within the town's jurisdiction, so the 100 foot buffer zone, but not in the 25 foot state required do not disturb zone. So that, you can see those two lines there, the red line, sorry, there's the red one, that's the 25 foot do not disturb. The blue one is the 100 foot. But when I was mentioning it's coming in, you see how those gray lines, they come pretty much parallel with the street and the building there. And then they start to come over closer to Canton Ave. So that's the slope, right? So
Right.
that the more if you made the building longer this way, the more it's out of the ground, lower in the slope, the further left you go there. Right? So this is trying to keep it where it's before it starts to make that turn.
So
What
we're
are the
talking about
dimensions of
adding-
that?
How many spots again are we adding? 50,
Yes.
So, it would be 50 lower level spots and then 20,
70 total?
No, no,
64
50.
by 160.
It's what, I'm sorry.
162 by 64.
64.
And whatever use is above that is
I mean,
takes away from that.
this could be 60 if you didn't have a little cafe there. This
Yeah.
was just to show
Mhm.
if you had a little amenity
Yeah,
there. you could
the
combine it.
intention was not to have it be just.
Just a
a
parking.
lot, Right.
Yeah.
And
So
we-
whether it has something above
Any
it.
idea on the
but-
cost on it? Do we have any estimate on?
No,
rough
no,
number?
but what I will say here, I looked at the retaining wall amount. There's not a lot of retaining wall here like there was in the others. So, and this retaining wall down here to do that slope is pretty low. And
How many feet is it?
I think a couple, 3 feet or something like that. It's pretty low. And then the area, you can see where this says, relocating the powder house, but it's just moving it a small amount.
From just sort of inside the envelope to forward 6 feet.
Yeah, and it does have 2 curb cuts. So this is the piece next that we asked for Beta to evaluate for safety purposes, right? So that contract's been signed and
Yeah.
they just need to do the work,
Yeah, Beta was out doing the on the ground analysis to get sight lines and curvature 2 weeks ago. They were, they had their surveyors out doing the equipment and all that. So that analysis is happening now. Report is forthcoming, but I don't have a timeline yet on
Do you-
what to expect.
Did you confirm that they're looking at these 2 curb cuts? Because I didn't see that in their scope.
No, I believe they were working off previous concepts.
But there's still 2 curb cuts in them.
Yeah,
All right, that's fine. So, so there's the potential in that kind of footprint for 50 to 60 spaces, depending upon if we put a public use. And even if we, let's say you wanted to use up above, you didn't want a cafe there, you still would need some kind of occupied space to get up above, like a little lobby. Maybe, you would have like a mailroom, trash room if it was housing up above. You still need something there. So unless it was just purely parking, nothing else, you come into one lot from upslope and one lot from downslope. And you have 2 trays of parking at 60 in that footprint. So we said that, that. I think that's a good footprint, understanding the topography, you ask cost, the more we would extend that footprint or move it on that, I think the price goes up.
Yeah.
So I think we could ask whether they could provide in our new funding. We can, now that we're in new fiscal year, starting next week, right, we can ask them if they can put together some preliminary budget on it, right?
sure.
And the thing about it, if a building goes up over it, then the pricing structure would be, that's the foundation. So the garage piece or the parking piece of it, the walls you build for that would probably not be that dissimilar because it's a wall for something that's out of the ground. And so then if you're adding, let's say 2 or 3 floors above it, that's not a huge load on top of those already walls. So the cost of the building up above it is not as, you have to take into account that some of your foundation's already built with parking. And I'm explaining that very well. For cost purposes. Yeah, that's doing double duty, right? That's the way to explain it. So while we have Will and Chris, do we have more questions and more thoughts about information that would be helpful?
So the biggest question, is this enough spaces, or there too many spaces, is it?
So it's a good question. I don't know if Chris wants to weigh in on it too, but if it's 50, well, it depends on how many spaces would
Or to another
would be
use?
public spaces versus whatever.
And how many spaces, if you want to have full use of the facilities, how many spaces would you need to make that happen?
See, with an overflow lot of something like this, I think it would be another 20 to 30. For those busy times.
So what we could say is, if you use 20 to 30 for the library,
Yeah,
what can you do with the other 20 to 30?
Right,
What kind of use can be supported by those parking spaces? Is it the cafe alone? Is it cafe housing? Is it housing? Is it office space for the town staff? I mean, I don't.
well, no, it's part of overflow parking for town hall too.
Yeah, but it's you know, the idea that to just build parking is, when you have limited land, you know, is there something else? Is there a need? Like when we did the master plan, there's discussion of town center being, as you said, like the library is being used, but it was really contemplated that it might be more than just the library, so that there might be some food trucks or a cafe or, you know, there are a lot of employees right here in this area. This is an area where as you know, the students congregate.
Right.
You know, so is there, would it make sense to have something that's available during the day? I wouldn't think it would be a nighttime type of thing, but I mean, a lot of people talk about not being able to get a cup of coffee or a sandwich, you know, in different parts of town. So is this a place for that? Is something gonna go in the ice house? Is that close enough? But, you know, so that's the discussion that we're going to have too about like the larger town center needs, you know, obviously the library is probably the biggest piece of that.
Can I say two things? One is, well, I'll just say one, kind of out of left field. But if would it be a location, and maybe the footprint's not big enough, or a more permanent solution to a teen center rather than renting the space of the church, then the parking lot would be, then that would be used during the day. The other thing I was gonna say is that over the years, we've looked into putting a cafe in the library because there's nothing here, right? There's, if there's coffee closer, people would get it. So a use for a coffee space would be great too, but I don't know, it might not be the footprint of the teen center. We might have a good enough solution next door, but I didn't know if that would be.
Or maybe that's a second floor use.
Right.
It's not housing, it's not office, you know, maybe it's the teen center. You know, it's just,
That's
what,
town.
yeah, it's a town facility.
Right.
And if, you know, there was some idea at some point whether, I think it's used for storage now, what's called the chemical building.
Right.
You know, that's a charming historic building, which is in the path between the high school and the middle school, right? So, whether that would be repurposed and storage could go someplace else.
It's used by auxiliary
yeah,
fire,
okay.
somewhat actively.
Okay,
It is, yeah.
so that maybe that just doesn't work, and maybe across the street would. If it's purely town, then of course there's the funding for it.
Right.
If it's some public-private partnership, then maybe there's some opportunity for some funding to come from the private side.
Right, and that's something that the library trustees looked into, I don't know how many years ago now. But the last time the Yellow House was for sale, we did have conversations with one of the potential buyers about some additional parking and shared costs for that.
I think so, there's a lot of support for the library, so if we come up with a solution here that really helps the library, then, you know, maybe there'll be adequate support for a full town use on that site. We don't need to be concern ourselves with that public-private option. But it seems like we ought to keep the kind of, at least at this stage, sort of what our options are. And then, you know, we could get into a cost scenario, and maybe it's not big enough to interest a private developer either. Maybe it makes the most sense to have it all public. So, and that use, obviously, if it's all town, then all the parking spaces are all towns, right?
Yeah.
And it's a great location, don't need to necessarily need a crosswalk, it's
Mhm.
in a great spot.
You know,
Okay,
I was just saying, it's interesting you say about the coffee thing, when the library, when they were renovating it and so forth, they had talked about putting a Starbucks in there.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, like a small little thing just for like coffee and
Right.
things.
if you
It's
think
interesting.
about how popular, I mean, now bookstores are coming
funny?
back,
Oh, yeah.
they're coming back with cafes.
Right, yeah.
And Trident Bookstore Cafe on Newbury Street,
Oh,
still
yeah,
there, and it's been there, I moved here in the eighties, it was there, and it's still
Very
there.
popular, very popular.
Very popular, yeah. So, the idea of the books and I think it also what you mentioned, like, if your child's at a program and you can go and grab a coffee
Right.
or a snack while they're in the program, that's just
Perfect.
perfect, and it would help town employees.
I love coffee that's not in our little Mr. Coffee machine.
Okay, so I guess what I'm hearing, you're gonna work on some more information for us. Maybe we can find out if, cost estimating is within Bowler's wheelhouse.
Yeah,
You know,
I'll check in with
preliminary
Brad.
cost estimating,
Um,
and we'll have an update from Beta on the crosswalk analysis. So that should be some good information for our July meeting. And then Dick, you're gonna talk about the traffic mitigation.
Can't wait.
At July, so those will be our two topics in July.
Note on the parking, I mentioned this to Chair guys the other day, but we have a new assistant town engineer, Sky Brube, comes from us from UMass Dartmouth. As part of their sort of engineering capstone process, they do partnerships with the town. They were working with us doing some green infrastructure at Milton Landing. But one of the first things Sky's done is submitted a proposal for the fall semester of seniors graduating in that fall semester for some additional data collection and restriping analysis that will build off of what we get from Beta and out of this conversation. So that'll be sort of preloaded for the fall to get additional data collection. They'll do it every half hour rather than every 90 minutes. And we have a lot more granular information. And then
Is that Saturday too, or is it?
they have currently scoped 2 weekdays and a special event, whether that's a Saturday or a Sunday.
I mean, we spoke about that, not being the use not being as intensive in July and August, right?
Yeah.
So having it be in the fall, that analysis is appropriate, right? Okay,
So that'll be good free analysis for us.
great.
Which we always do.
Chris or Tabor or anyone else in the audience, John?
No hands raised.
No,
But
I would just say, if you think of any other questions that you guys have for us, you know, please send them along so we can have them available for the next meeting, so. Thank you all.
I think the discussion's been pretty productive. We've actually made some progress, it seems, so.
Thank you.
Great.
Will's presentation is on your shared. So
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank
Thanks.
So let's go back to meeting date. Does July 24th work for everyone? Does that work for you, Will and Chris, if you're coming back to talk to us? Okay. Did we lose Chris already?
yeah.
Okay. We can check with her, Will, if you would. Thank you. We had talked about holding August, but also taking a summer vacation of August. I think, unless there's, something critical, I'm open to skipping the August meeting and going to September. Whatever the committee feels.
I like that idea.
That sounds great.
Okay,
That sounds
so.
good.
Okay, thank
Thank you,
you.
Will. Thanks.
All right, so if we look, you can go back, sorry. September. September 18th would be the third Monday. Does that work?
That's for me right now.
All right,
Same with me.
listen, we
That
can
seems fine.
confirm that in July, but we'll put that one on.
So let's back up to July 24th.
mhm.
That's the traffic mitigation.
Mhm.
Have you reached out and you spoken to anybody? Am I supposed to do
No,
that?
can you do that?
Who do you-
I can if you'd like me to.
No, I have no problem doing it. Who,
I thought you mentioned perhaps Jeff Mullen, right?
Jeff, well, I could ask him, then Mike Zulis really was one that put it
Okay.
together. I would imagine we'd want to have the chair of the traffic commission there, right?
Who's responsible for implementing the plan? I know you.
You know, that's a really good
was
question.
concerned.
You know, why don't someone help me with that? I'm not exactly sure. I think it's Chase Berkeley, yeah?
I don't think it's specifically put on a single person. I know there are elements that work for the traffic commission to take up on into account, and then that obviously goes as a select board recommendation. So a lot of it ends up falling on the select board. I'm sorry, Roxanne. But there is elements, particularly as it relates to the scheduling of repaving and how that can be integrated into other.
Okay, because when we finished up the report, there was a lot of talk at the very end of it about who was going to have responsibility or ownership of the traffic mitigation plan. And Mike Dennehy at that time, supported by Mike Zulis, they were very strong about that they wanted not to have a separate division like we have here, but it was going to be the town administrator would have that responsibility. Would it be fair to say that it's Nick Milano who would have responsibility?
It could be, you're more of an expert on what that committee did than I am.
Okay, well, that's scary, but there's an expert on. I'm just, what we've been trying to do is to try to find out someone to say, this is mine, I'm going to be the person from the town side coordinating the implementation of the tenants in the mitigation plan, right?
So,
And part of that also, and I think the traffic engineer, the new traffic engineer is coming on board July 1st, is that right? Or thereabouts?
Well, it won't come on that Saturday.
No, I don't mean, I meant.
I don't know what the schedule for the new engineer is.
Do you know how much time he has, is he budgeted for?
I don't know.
Okay,
The hiring
all right, so put you on the spot, Jeff.
Well, I just like,
No.
it's a testament to how some of these things get settled.
so I guess.
Yeah, we just want to get
Yeah.
settled, I guess that's what we're trying to. do.
Yeah, so to the extent that as you've made the point number of times, Dick, that a common thread through most comments that most boards and committees hear is about traffic concerns from residents, right? So when we're thinking about updating the plan, obviously that was a body of work, that was an important body of work. You represent this committee on that traffic mitigation committee. So the recommendations, I recall hearing that summary delivered to the select board, and there were some really good recommendations, understanding who's responsible to implement or to go forward with those recommendations, and the status of those, I think, is important for us to understand as we think about the plan, right? So whoever you think would be most beneficial to
Well,
invite,
why don't I reach out to Mike Lewis?
okay,
So he's sort of the common thread, then we can talk to his, he's still the chairman of the select board.
right,
And let him make a determination who he might think should
Okay.
be, because there have been some people that have moved around who are part of that committee. And obviously, Jeff Mullen would be a great one, but, Michael might have a different thought on this. But one of the things too, and I think we have to keep in mind, is we funded
yeah, oh, I know.
that computer software, and I think that, not to be nitpicking on that, but it wasn't insignificant. And I don't think it's been used more than once or twice. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, so the use cases for it that were determined when it was funded
Right.
have not really happened. This is really for these projects that would need a traffic analysis, but are not doing it themselves, like, they're doing it, the memory care, project that they're doing.
Right, I mean,
But my point about memory care, and I missed the June 8th meeting when I was traveling, when they talked about traffic, but
Yeah.
it'll be coming up again in July. They should be, there's ideas floated about closing streets, making them one way, changing signaling. None of that should be done without running it through the model, because the model will show you what will happen to the traffic.
Well, yeah.
That's what we talked about, right?
Doesn't that make good sense? It really doesn't.
That's the
Thank you,
whole
Sharon.
idea, right?
Very good. Thank you. You've only been-
I'm bringing you up on July 13th.
So I
Anyway,
think
for sure.
that has been very consistent, and it has been the whole idea, instead of trying to do guesswork, since the town, as I've said a number of times, they didn't have anyone with particular expertise, even though people like Josh and Tim and the town engineer all have some understanding about traffic. We don't have anybody who really can sit down and say, okay, if you block the street off, this is what we think the traffic is going to go. How does this impact our decisions moving forward?
And this wasn't just something that came out of the sky. I mean, I was in a conversation with Bill Clark when he was the director of planning, and Jeff Maximus, I think,
Oh, yeah.
remember Jeff from
Yeah.
Beta?
Yeah.
And he told me about the potential of doing these models and gave us the cost, and that's how we arrived at going
That
forward.
was all 2018. I mean, there's no rush in these things. You know, I mean, we have so many different projects that are gonna be impacted, and all I'll say is that if traffic is a problem, we have to deal with it. If it's not a problem, let's forget about it. But I will tell you, it won't fix itself, and if you just look at some of the comments made on East Milton Square, and I know we're dealing with the situation down there, of people sitting through 7 or 8 changes of lights coming up Granite Avenue, to get into Milton, probably going down to your house and my house, is that, you know, they're working on it, it's a work in progress, but it's not getting any better unless we can say to people, and I don't have a problem saying this, we just can't fix it. It is what it is. Traffic is everywhere. There's nothing you can do about it. Live with it, and let's move on to something else. I'm not willing to do that yet. So I think we at least deserve, this is the other thing I brought this up, ad nauseam, is that we've asked people to participate in these forums and submit their comment and questions and concerns. And we said to them at the time, we weren't gonna waste your time. This report is not gonna sit in the shelf, right? And you know what? It's sitting in the shelf. So I'm sorry, it's just something that just has to be taken care of once and for all. And hopefully we can get some clarification as to what the next steps are at our next meeting, because I think it's just fair to go back to people and say, you know what? I know we asked you what you thought, but you know, we just didn't do anything about it.
Do you think it would be worthwhile, and would you be willing to reach out to Chase Berkeley to see when this new engineer is starting?
I
And
can do that,
okay.
staffing.
I
follow
think
up.
that what I'd like to do, I'm gonna do this now, I'm gonna
Yeah.
go with a chain of command, and I'm
Okay.
gonna go start with Mike Jules,
Okay,
work it down to Nick Milano, work it down to
okay,
whoever Nick decides should be responsible.
okay.
So I'm not just meddling into people's business, right?
Sounds good to you.
Good.
Okay, so, thank you, Dick. That'll be July 24th, as well as the library, parking, town center parking, etc. Then, citizens speak, we don't.
We have citizens on.
We have citizens, we have 7
Maggie's
participants.
on the call.
Yeah, Ellen Carroll.
Ellen Carroll.
Unnamed users.
Okay, is anyone wish to speak? Raise your hand if you would. Not seeing anyone? Okay. Josh? Staff update, do you have one?
A lot of it was covered, in this meeting. As I said, I do know we hired a new assistant town engineer. I'll check in on the status for the traffic engineer, but, Sky so far has been a great help to Marina. She was kind of working, it was just her and Alan for a time, our GIS specialist, so it's good to see that after the building build full again.
Great.
And if there's a traffic person in there, even better. We don't think I have any other relevant updates. There's lots of things happening. Not a big-
Okay,
Like,
all right, thanks, Josh. On the 7, 8, 10 tied together, all of you kindly volunteered to take on a subject topic. Dick's jumping right in the next one. And we could, think about, what should follow, for September. So we can maybe just have everybody give a brief summary, brief recommendation at the July meeting, just so we can think about the September meeting. You know, what we might want to prioritize for September.
Chris and Pat brought up something that I'm interested in finding out. I'm not sure if the information is available, but or how we would get the information is to why do people move to Milton? And I think that, you know, some people would say, well, gee, and you know, the usual migration would be oftentimes from Dorchester, maybe Jamaica Plain, South Boston. I want some more space. I'm living in a 3-family house. I want a backyard. I want more open space, you know, those types of things. Or it could be other reasons. But I think that's going to go a long way as we talk about a lot of issues that are going to be coming before the town as to going back to the question. And it's a very legitimate question I thought they brought up. It means words mean different things to different people. But when people say preserve the character of the town of Milton, what is it about the character that brought you here? Exactly.
And then, yeah, and the other thing is what keeps people from here too. I mean, you know,
I
like,
think that's a little more difficult.
I mean, what keeps like employees from being able to live here? I'm pointing over here because Josh is.
Okay, maybe it could be-
I
You
don't
know.
live here. I couldn't if I wanted to.
Yeah, I mean,
I just think that's important to understand too, because it's gonna be hard to get at. But one of the ways I think we can get that information that you were talking about, though, with that question, why do people move to Milton, the realtors? I hear a lot from Carolyn Cahill, what she hears from clients. So, you know, we could do maybe a little outreach to,
okay,
we know a couple of them, but, you know.
The question, it'll all be anecdotal,
Mhm.
but I think it'll give us some sense of why people are moving here, maybe also give us an idea why people are moving away from here. And you know, maybe, you know, to your question, someone said, I made a look at Milton, but I didn't like it, what didn't you like about it? Right? And I think we're sort of dancing around, I think we're close to coming to some sort of an agreement, consensus about, you know, what we want to see, and I just think we have to get a little more data. Instead of saying, well, I talked to a friend, I talked to this person, that type of stuff. And, yeah. So that would be interesting to me, because I think it's surely going to have some impact as we talk about the MBTA new zoning in terms of what is it? I mean, if I move from Dorchester and all of a sudden I bought a house in Milton, and all of a sudden, you know, I said, which is great, all of a sudden next door to me, I have four apartment buildings. Now, does that impact, you know, does that impact me positively or negatively? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like with the 40Bs that just get to pop up anywhere next to
Well,
neighbors.
well,
I mean,
okay,
we don't meet our housing needs, they pop up somewhere.
you know, we weren't
We
even.
plan for it or we don't.
Even close to 10%, and I think a lot of people think that as we get closer and closer to that 10%, the game's over, is it? Right?
Well, and we want to know what the date
What
is,
is-
right?
What is the game? And I think that what it is, you know, what's.
I mean, I think part of about the maybe the housing discussion should be some interviews with our employers. So like Milton Hospital, Curry College, I mean, the Milton Academy, the town, like where do people live in town? Do they not? I don't know, just it would be useful. Do you find that attracting employees is a challenge or not because of housing prices in Milton? Because, you know, like that, there's stuff that you read about but the state level, what the concern about affordable housing, actually, it's all the way across the country, not just in Massachusetts, but it has to do with keeping and attracting talent, you know, for companies, for institutions, et cetera. And I'm sure for town hall too, you know, so, for the schools, you know,
Have to pay them more money, right, Josh?
it's your taxes for.
Well, this is not gonna get that. You take a look at Milton.
Yeah.
95% residential as it is right now, very small commercial. And I've heard people talk about, you know, in 1938, the town was owned so we could have 60,000 people in the town. And I think there's a reason why we don't have 60,000 people, because people who lived in Milton at the time didn't want 60,000 people to live in Milton, right?
Yeah.
So there have been decisions made, some good, some not so good, that have affected that. But right now, you know, I don't know where you find this land to build the new housing stock. Right, and that goes back to what I was saying before, right? As I said, if I just moved from, you know, Cobble Square, tree family home, sold my house at a pretty good value, moved to Milton, get a single family home also next door, which is what I left behind, and why did I pay a premium to move it? Right?
Right,
Well-
depends on why we moved here.
Right.
It depends on, the, I guess, value of understanding first, and then working to solve housing challenges, right? Because the fact that a lot of us bought our homes before prices skyrocketed out. I know when Rich Beeler was on the planning board, he said numerous times, I wouldn't be able to afford to buy a house in Milton today. And I wonder how many people are in the same boat, you know, because prices are.
Years ago, and I don't know if I could right now.
Exactly. I mean, we bought 25 years ago, but you know, and the pricing has just gotten, so if somebody, you know, decision 25 years ago about why they moved to Milton versus 5 years ago or 2 years ago, they're gonna have different answers, but it's worth trying to parse it out. But I do think that we have to, you know, buying, like thinking what's going to be next door it doesn't help us think through what today's needs are versus what the needs were 25 years ago.
Yeah, but
50 years ago.
I get the macro, but I think a lot of people unfortunately, they think micro, they think, what about me?
Well, am I?
Yeah, exactly. You know, I didn't buy anything, this isn't what I want, and everything's, well, you know, all of a sudden things are changing around you. So you might think it's good, you might think it's bad, but you may have a situation with this person in the middle, saying, wait, I'll sell a food developer, and I'll build another four-story, four unit building, right? And then we have to deal with parking, right?
Well, this is where this is where the calibration that we're trying with the consultants, and the only thing the MBTA communities does allow for, Dick, is a lot of local control over the
Sure,
kind of
I
scale
understand what-
that the 40B.
I went to the meeting and I went back to you, and said, I understand you want to provide more housing options for people, which is very consistent with the master plan. I think 40Bs are doing a lot of that right now. Now.
That's the worst kind in my view,
I
sorry.
understand, but that's today. That's happening today.
And that's because we haven't planned that it's happening today. And like I said, calibrated is that we can come up with something that's zoning that's going to be far more compatible with the neighborhoods. Like if you're following I don't know how carefully everyone's understanding what the consultants are doing, but you can have this, the required density of 15 units an acre be an average of 15. So you can have a district that has 5 units an acre. Actually, you know, you have to have 3 units on a parcel in order for it to be considered multifamily, but you could have a 3-unit parcel in some areas, and you can find other areas like over at the state's DPW yard on Granite Ave to have higher density. We're even talking about zoning the Flatley building over by the highway. That parcel is part of the zone
Granite Ave.
to Granite Ave. That office buildings are like not,
You're doing well.
it's just zoning, it's zoning. You're thinking about the future with the zoning.
That's the only change. It's not a mandate.
You don't have to change it, but you're anticipating if something changed somewhere and you want to meet the need, These are places where, that can absorb higher density than the house next to you. So that's the idea. You can try and do something, because you have to have something within the half mile on that one. But how, you have that's one of the higher density areas that we have now. It's complex because of how you meet the regulations requirements. And that's what we're asking the consultant to run a model where this is the low density here and it's the high density.
Your chocolate factory like thing.
Yeah, we said, let's zone higher density for like the whole strip of 88 Wharf, the Web Mill, 36 Central, Milton Hill House, 131 Elliott. It's already that level of density. And then and that's within a half mile. So I guess my point is we can try and set the controls we think might work in Milton versus the 40B, where the way it's been implemented in Milton, in my mind as an architect, is I never fathom an architect would propose something that's been proposed in Milton, okay? So that's how lousy these are. I don't throw the ice house into that category. But when you're tearing down historic properties like the one on Blue Hill Avenue, historic gardens, and you're enveloping them with these things that are, it's like jamming, 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag. The same thing on Canton Ave, the same thing on Bristol Road, same thing on Amor Road, same thing in East Milton Square, same thing on Randolph Ave.
River Street, that big. Yeah, it's not in Milton, but the.
Oh, next to the MBTA, the old Cody Motor.
Yeah, I know.
But, so I guess that's my, my thought is we may not.
I'm very interested in please.
Yeah, and I don't know yet. I just like thinking, like, the more I learn about it, the more we try and tailor it. I think it could work. The other thing is that it doesn't usurp Concom and it doesn't usurp historic districts.
Or any like wetlands regulation, stormwater bylaw.
Yeah, so like, for example, if you did do this along 88 Wharf and the extra space storage, that's still chapter 91, that's still wetlands. And if we put a historic district there, like the Historic District Study Committee has said, it wouldn't usurp that. So those are controls that don't exist in 40B because they're getting away. They're getting away even with Concom denying it, DEP's going along with stuff too. So it's just. Anyway, that's the housing piece of what we talked about housing. It encompasses so much. It could take a bit. I forgot who grabbed housing at our last meeting, who said they would take it. Elaine. We've got a lot for you. So, okay, well, she did say she would watch the tape.
Right.
All right, anything else that anybody would like to see as a topic for the agenda in an upcoming meeting? Other than what we've talked about?
Gotta look at it again.
I think at some point, Warren and I are gonna talk about this tomorrow a little bit, is the fact of the matter is we do have to talk about expanding and reinvigorating, I guess, for lack of better terms, some of our the business district. We don't have any. And I think that's something else we have to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to maximize your opportunities for business, the revenue before you go back to the.
So
your overrides.
you know that the owner of the Web Mill building at Elliott and Adams has a proposal that he's working with chapter 91 now, but he'll be coming forward in a mixed use development there. That'll be the first real project under the overlay, which will be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've heard that he just bought the Bank of America building across the street, and he already had purchased the Ferrucci buildings that are.
You bought that? Next to
The Ferrucci buildings?
Ferrucci building next to the Citizen.
Yeah, he owns those properties too. If you could get the citizens kiosk in between, I don't know what'll happen with that. But in any case, we are going to see some activity in Milton Village. We're gonna see the 440 Granite Ave in East Milton, if the
It's just
CPA, yeah.
Well, the town also got some money, so for grant money. Walter Timothy got some money for each of his towns towards looking at some of the, building up business areas and so forth. I forget what it was called, economic development, I
Yeah,
guess.
it was,
called.
an
Yeah,
economic development.
yes,
And we've also got grant money for the East Milton Square mixed use overlay zoning.
Good.
To pay for
Well,
that.
I think it's really interesting, the idea of. I was reading a planning journal probably where it said like downtown Boston type of places where people would come from their homes to their offices. Those are the places that are still struggling. Their retail areas are still really struggling. But the potential, the potential for people working from home has made the local retail environment, which had been challenging, nail salons and hair salons and real estate offices. But that's every survey you do, people will say they want something else, right? That they want,
Well, that's why Assembly Square,
Yeah.
Block, all of those
Yeah.
places.
Yeah.
So the living at the ball now, right? That's what people want to do.
Right.
But MBTA communities, we can't require them to put any kind of mixed use in there.
We can't mandate commercial use because of the by right nature of the thing. But we can craft this thoughtfully in thinking of, is there a density bonus that we can say to add commercial space? That's typically the way we've been advised and how other communities are approaching these sort of opportunities. So what's that trade-off? Where can we put them in a desirable level of density so that these community benefits flow? Commercial space and affordable housing were the two sort of most cited density bonus type community benefits that we've received so far in the survey that we're in.
That's great.
Speaking about the MBTA, has there been any more talk with anyone about the air rights on the MBTA parking lot in Milton Village?
So I know Hajar and the folks who manage that parking lot were in conversation as of this fall. Nothing has come across our desk since those conversations. They were progressing positively, it seemed. But I don't know if they have either stalled or if it's just.
So Hajar is the only person that has been talking to the MBTA.
Well, Hajar owns the
Building next
the
door.
building that would essentially be expanded.
But it wouldn't have to be expanded. Someone else could, another developer could go in there.
Sure, I've not heard of, I'm sure Jack Wild would be chomping at the bit to try and
You know,
maximize.
the challenge.
Going up to two or three stories on that one.
Yeah,
And because that would be, once again, if you tie into what you were talking about with this, I mean, here we are, we're talking about the MBTA, things we have to do because of having 1 mile of trolley through Milton. And the same vein, we're trying to have them fix the stairs in Milton Village. And then they have a piece of property that we could develop, would generate tax revenues and tie into some commercial / residential and maybe affordable housing there. And
The T was open to it. I
Yeah.
participated in a meeting with
Yeah.
representatives from the T. It was a Zoom
good,
meeting.
well, that's,
This was like a couple of years ago, but the challenge with the HR proposal was that it would eliminate that parking, and the MBTA wanted post-COVID numbers on how much that parking lot was used, so that they weren't necessarily comfortable saying all of their parking would go away. So then where would the parking for the new development go?
yeah, so we, when we were in conversations with the T and their parking managers, we were looking at mostly what we could take from the lot with the EV chargers off of the Wharf Street. It's at the property of 25 Wharf or the.
Right.
We have dedicated a lot of those to service parking anyway, so they're not explicitly sort of public regular use. So there was an opportunity there as well as some at 41 Wharf, Milton Landing.
Right.
But that was deemed somewhat a little too far away from the station. So
You sure?
that was the T's thing, right? Like they were the ones who had that leverage in that conversation. That was how it ended up in the conversation we had.
Because I remember when Bill Clark was here, I think Tim and I had a conversation.
Yeah.
that we thought we could certainly replicate this. I think it was 17 spots down there. When I was down there, I took past week, I was down there twice and counted the spots. I think there were 8 cars both times I was there.
Yeah, I just like I did here with Town Center, I did a parking count analysis for all of Milton Village for additional sort of usage. But particularly we counted, even during a market day over the summer, to see who was not using the T. And there's still maybe half the lot, if that.
That's right.
And I mean, you saw the numbers at our meeting, the MBTA communities meeting last Thursday, and then I know, I believe Roxanne is here at the MBTA's Mattapan line transformation. I mean, some stations, I think it's Cape Street is at 16% of
Those
pre-COVID.
12 people represent about 60%.
Yeah, I mean.
Cape was like, what, 10 or
Yeah,
something?
I mean, and
Well, I mean,
that's a testament
Very
to
low.
the inefficient land use around those stations, right? Not necessarily the quality of rail, like.
It's
The
a
trolley
nice
is no
station.
better
Trolley at
at Milton
Cape.
Station than it is at our Central Square than it is at Cape Street, just because of how the area around it's used, so. This could be an opportunity to really revitalize those stops.
although I will say that the Globe had a good article probably about a month ago saying how the T with the commuter rail was really bumping up their ridership. And like the red line and everything was actually decreased because of their problems. Number one, when they have to go slower, so it's taking longer to get places, and all of the problems that they've had, you know, with the breakdowns, with different things that have come up. And actually, it cited Fairmont as up 30% in ridership. And I can tell you, my son takes that line. I drop him sometimes. It is crowded there in the morning. It wasn't as crowded before COVID over there. So I do believe that, you know, and different people I talk to that normally might take the red line, they've switched and they're going the commuter rail because it's more reliable.
Yeah,
People
my-
want to take the T, that's what
You know?
we've heard, and.
My
it's-
son
it's-
started a job.
Only if you
He
work
did the
in
same
town.
thing.
If you're
Yeah.
not working in town, you're
Yeah.
not taking the T now, are you?
All right, but like if,
Yeah.
so I'll
On
just give an
access.
anecdote. My 22-year-old son just started a job downtown.
Yeah.
It's a law firm. They're allowed to be hybrid or some remote or fully in person. And he opted for the hybrid. They will provide him with dollars for a T path or commuter rail path. So he tried the red line. And it took a long time. And then I suggested to him the Fairmont line on the commuter rail line. He wants to bike to the Cummins Highway stop or station. So far, he's been dropped off because he doesn't know where to put the bike when he gets on the train and when he gets off. Thus far, he hasn't figured that out. But it's reliable, as you said, it's on time, and it takes 20 minutes to get to South Station. So I can, just from the anecdote of him, can see it, and until they get this stuff fixed with the red lines, it's going to be a challenge, but actually all of them, right, all the lines,
I mean,
all the lines.
it was a pretty good article. I mean, actually, you know, so,
And there,
and I see it, like visibly, I've seen.
Yeah.
Just the.
well, and
Yeah.
there also, I think, is, I saw one, I don't know if it was a Globe or Commonwealth Magazine or another one, but it was basically, okay, the Healy administration, it's been 6 months. And they want to hold them accountable, hold her administration accountable for the MBTA. The new hire as a general manager, the interim was doing a good job. And if everyone, employers are gonna have a challenge, like, and the city of Boston's gonna have a challenge, because if employers aren't gonna locate downtown Boston, the tax base of downtown Boston, it's empty streets of downtown Boston.
Talking to, in my, the tables on, with commercial real estate people. They want people's leases to come up, that, you think they're signing up for the same amount of space at the same price in downtown Boston?
50%.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're re-signing it around 50% of the size. But I mean, the downtown right now, they're still at 25%, you know, key fobs, swipes, card swipes. And that's just because most people are only working Tuesdays and Wednesdays in downtown, and then Mondays and Fridays, well, they're probably hardly working at all. It is amazing the amount of, why everybody wants to do it Tuesday, Wednesdays, or Wednesday, Thursdays, but it's really been a problem. But anecdotally, myself, I go downtown, they're still charging $35 a day to park. So I've taken the T a couple of times, and after an hour and 15 minutes each way, forget it, I'll pay to park. It's just not, the red line is not worth it until they can get it moving. It's just,
No.
and the trolley isn't bad, the trolley is fine, but I don't want to go to Ashmont, I want to go to downtown. So that's the problem.
Well, the Ashmont is held up also by the same, isn't it, by the same slowness? Yeah, so you might get the Ashmont, I mean, like today, I went for a bike ride at 5 o'clock along the Ponset Trail, and there were plenty of trolleys going back and forth at that hour. But if they're getting hung up at Ashmont, that's the problem, right?
Yeah, the trolleys are all empty because nobody wants to do just to Ashmont. They want to go beyond that, and that's the problem.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, if I attended that MBTA community meeting also, and there are members of the Mattapan community who want to make sure that line's running and running well, they use it.
And they.
So they use it, they said they use
Big
it,
issue.
yeah.
Well, they definitely want to use it, but they do want to go beyond Ashmont, and that's the problem. The main
Yeah,
red line
that's what
subway,
he said,
it's so slow. You could walk faster.
I don't know how long that's supposed to last, I hope it's not. Extended
But
period,
it
but
brings up the
anyway.
idea that, we don't know how long that'll take to recover, right? But it means that for now, people want to stay in Milton, right? They can't technically leave. So we should be able to provide those services for them, business people.
Yeah, so the business community, right, so I think the hybrid model is not gonna go away entirely. And they're just. I actually even wondered whether there's a market for some kind of shared workspace, because getting out of the house to work part-time or meeting clients. That you don't have to do it in your kitchen or your dining room.
Well, Vegas had that for years, you could rent a room, space for one day if you want. And have all the administrative help with it, and it worked out if you wanted that one meeting, if you want to get everyone together. But at the bank I work at, we gave people a choice we'll give you a X raise, a pretty good raise, and we want you in the bank 5 days a week, or we'll give you a much lower raise, and you can work at home, right? Now, one person took the high number.
No way,
No, not one person,
not one?
not one.
Not with traffic, not.
No.
Wow.
So, and as I said, it's one of those things we're gonna have to take a look at it, we put this whole concept together, and I think someone told me what was the cost of redoing Cape Street was
Well, no, it was actually Valley Road.
Valley Road.
That's, so when I said Cape, and I actually meant to say Valley Road, that was one of the lowest. Like ridership stops, and it was like 20 million, I think they said.
That's because it's not handicapped
Yeah,
accessible.
so a lot of it is bringing things up to compliance, is really challenging, and we see that same with building and energy codes for old buildings, which is why it's
So
very hard to.
we would spend $4 million.
But that's why it's taking forever.
Yeah.
Because, well, there was a gentleman on there from Mattapan that had called in, and he was saying, I've been coming to these meetings for like well over 5 years, and there's nothing different. There was absolutely nothing different on there. So it was just very interesting, because everybody always says it's gonna take years for them to fix this. And this gentleman was on there saying, I come to these meetings, I hear the same thing every time, and we're at 15% design. For part of it, the line.
Right.
Okay, so.
And it's only gonna get more expensive.
What's the thing? I mean, that's.
Well, I mean.
That's just interesting.
Yeah, I think the MBTA has made some decisions that have impacted communities of color and in ways that are not equitable in terms, they're the larger, actually by statistics, larger users of public transit, and yet they don't have the best access to service. And so I don't, that trolley is, I don't see that going away is there because of that?
But that's all part of it, that's only part of it. If they take it from Mattapan to Ashland, and Ashland doesn't get them to where they want to go, that doesn't work either. They'll.
Well, they've got
they'll
to
go down the
fix,
Cummins Highway and hop on the commuter rail.
well,
That's a choice. You're looking at a hand, you can walk through the commuter rail, right? Or you could go to
well,
Ashland
they're gonna
Station.
take the commuter rail now, if I live in Mattapan Square. I could take that.
Or the commuter rail might be priced out.
No,
That's the other piece.
That's the other piece.
I think it's actually similar though. I believe that the
No.
Fairmont and the Red Line are very similar in
They
price.
changed that Fairmont line not that long ago.
They went up a little, but they're very, like, if you compare that to the Reedville line, Reedville's a lot more money. But I think Fairmont's under $3 a trip one way, so it's very comparable to what you would pay in a Red Line trip. Yeah, so that's, and it stops at Blue Hill Ave and different places. What's that?
For the passes?
I don't know how it is with the passes, but
That was the hard part.
yeah.
When I was trying to make a decision, I was like, I can't. I was in resident.
Yeah.
It's subsidized.
But a lot of schools would do subsidized, like you can get a subsidized passport, either. A lot of them do that, or jobs sometimes do that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, like my son's
Yeah.
subsidizing,
yeah.
he has to just take it more than 50% of the week to go
Yeah.
to work, and he gets a subsidized, $90 a month he gets for the pass.
Well, that's why employees will do that.
Good,
right?
That's 5 trips, but it takes
Yeah.
6 trips to get there and back.
No, not on the commuter rail, I don't think he's got a big cost over that,
Yeah,
not on the Fairmont line anyway.
yeah.
See, it doesn't work.
Mm.
All right, well, we're not gonna solve the problems of the T at this committee, are we? So,
For the July meeting in the August.
and no, I guess it's September 18th.
Tomorrow.
All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make, oh, she did. Oh, Richard.
All those in, Regina made it.
And.
Oh. Is
All right,
that-
You wanna take a
second.
second? Okay.
Regina, number one, I second.
They
Regina.
did,
Regina, I got.
they were too quick, yeah, you already beat me to
Right behind Regina.
it.
Shaver,
It always comes.
Aye.
Roxanne?
Yes.
Yeah.
Lauren, Dick,
Yeah.
Regina, Cheryl, yes.
All right.
Thank you,
Thank
Josh.
you. Thank you.
How you feeling?
See you in July.
Down?
That's not right.